Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into Tata Steel's Q2 performance for fiscal year 2025.
Right.
And joining me to break it all down is a financial expert with a really deep understanding of the Indian steel market.
Happy to be here.
So Tata Steel's dealing with a global economic landscape that's, well, let's just say it could be better.
Yeah.
We're looking at subdued activity, that persistent inflation, and, those geopolitical tensions that just never seem to fade away.
It's definitely been a challenging backdrop. And, to make things even more interesting, we've got China's recent activity in the steel market. Specifically, their steel exports have just surged. We're talking over 10 million tons just in September, an 8-year high.
Okay, so 10 million tons. I mean, that sounds like a lot, but
Yeah.
Can you kind of break down for me why that's such a big deal?
Sure. So the main issue is that China is often exporting this steel at prices that are actually below market value. And that ends up disrupting the global playing field. It's almost like this tidal wave of cheap steel hitting the market, and it puts pressure on prices and profits for all the other steel producers.
So it's not just the volume, it's the pricing strategy.
Yeah.
And how are other countries kind of reacting to this? Especially, India in particular.
Well, globally, we're seeing a wave of anti-dumping investigations, and that includes India as countries are trying to protect their domestic steel industries.
It's like global steel chess. Okay, so let's shift our focus a little bit to Tata Steel's performance in India. They seem to be doing pretty well, actually, despite all these global challenges.
Yeah, they've shown a lot of resilience. Tata Steel India actually increased their crude steel production this quarter by 5% year on year, hitting 5.3 million tons.
Wow, that's impressive. But production is one thing. Are they actually able to sell all that steel?
Absolutely. Their domestic sales have been really strong. In fact, their retail brand Tata Tiscon has seen a 20% growth year on year.
So people are literally building with Tata Steel. And it seems like they're not just keeping up, but they're innovating too.
Yeah.
Right. I read something about a new e-commerce platform.
Yes. They've launched something called Ashiana. It's an e-commerce platform designed to streamline how customers buy steel, and they're also expanding their physical presence with new construction service centers.
So they're really meeting customers where they are both online and offline. Pretty smart move. Now let's talk about their major expansion project in Kalinganagar. This seems like a key part of their growth strategy.
It's a total game changer. They've actually fired up a 5 million ton per annum blast furnace. It's the largest in all of India. To put that into perspective, imagine 100,000 fully loaded trucks, all with steel. And it's already churning out about 7,500 tons a day. And that number's only going to increase.
7,500 tons every day from just one furnace. That's mind-boggling. But what makes this expansion so significant?
Well, besides the sheer scale, this new blast furnace is incredibly eco-friendly. It uses really cutting-edge technology that reduces water and power consumption by 20% compared to more traditional furnaces.
So it's not just about producing more. It's about producing it responsibly. Okay, let's kind of switch gears a bit now and look at Tata Steel's operations in the UK. They're undergoing some major restructuring there.
Yeah, the UK is a whole different story. They've actually decommissioned both blast furnaces at their Port Talbot facility. This is a huge shift as they move toward greener steel making.
Wow. Decommissioning blast furnaces sounds like a pretty bold move.
Yeah.
What's the plan moving forward?
So they're investing about 1.25 billion. That's roughly 13,000 crores into a new green steelmaking project. And get this, the UK government's backing them up with a grant of 500 million, or about 5,000 crores.
Wow, that's a significant investment from both Tata Steel and the UK government. What does all this mean for jobs in the UK steel industry?
It's all about securing the future of UP steelmaking and the livelihoods of thousands of workers. The UK government really recognizes that this industry plays a vital role and is supporting its transition.
Okay, so now let's hop over to the Netherlands. What's the situation like there for Tata Steel?
So the Netherlands is facing some headwinds from lower demand, and you guessed it, the ripple effect of those Chinese steel imports. But the good news is Tata Steel is tackling these challenges head-on with some serious cost-saving measures.
So they're adapting to the local market conditions. Any other positive news from the Netherlands?
Yeah, their production has stabilized after a recent blast furnace relining. They're back on track, which is definitely good news for their operations there.
All right, so we've covered production, expansion, and some restructuring. Now let's get down to the numbers. I'm ready for you to decode all these financials for us.
Let's dive in. So looking at their consolidated performance overall, Tata Steel recorded a revenue of 53,905 crores. That's a massive figure, over 6.5 billion US dollars. And their EBITDA, which is essentially their operating profit, came in at 6,224 crores, or about 750 million US dollars.
Those are some serious numbers. Can you help me understand what this actually means for Tata Steel?
These figures basically show their overall financial health across all of their global operations. And the EBITDA specifically gives us a good idea of their core profitability. This is before we even factor in things like interest, taxes, and depreciation.
That's really helpful. Now let's zoom in a bit on their regional performance, starting with India. How did their operations there fare?
So Tata Steel standalone, which mainly represents their India business, achieved an EBITDA of 6,734 crores. That's a little over 800 million US dollars. And this translates to an EBITDA margin of around 21%.
21%. That's a really healthy margin. Now, what about their per ton profitability in India?
Sure, the standalone EBITDA per ton of steel was around 13,176, or roughly 160 US dollars.
Okay, that definitely puts things in perspective. So even with all the global challenges and fluctuating steel prices, they're maintaining solid profitability in India. What were some of the key drivers of this strong performance?
Well, higher production volumes definitely played a role, but they've also done a great job at improving their costs.
Cost improvements in this economic climate. Tell me more.
Sure, so they've seen a reduction in material costs,
Yeah.
particularly for coking coal, which is a really key ingredient in steelmaking. And they've also just become more efficient in their overall operations. Yeah, they've really streamlined their processes and optimized their resource use.
Efficiency is key, especially in these challenging times. Now, you mentioned Neelachal Ispat Nigam Limited a little bit earlier. It's a subsidiary of Tata Steel in India, right?
That's right, and they're actually making a pretty positive contribution. They're operating at full capacity now, producing around 1 million tons of steel per year. And their operating parameters have really stabilized, resulting in a 13% EBITDA margin.
That's a pretty solid performance from Neelachal. It seems like they're a pretty valuable asset for Tata Steel, and their expansion plans there sound pretty promising. Okay, so let's shift our focus back to Europe now, starting with the Netherlands.
Okay, so in the Netherlands, their EBITDA was about 22 million this quarter, or roughly 230 crores. Now, to really understand that figure, we need to compare it to the previous quarter, where they made about 43 million pounds. That's about 450 crores.
So their profitability declined compared to the last quarter. What factors contributed to this?
Well, the European steel market in general is facing kind of a slowdown with subdued economic activity and some weakness in industrial output. And that's really putting pressure on both demand and prices.
So those global economic headwinds are starting to impact demand in Europe. How did this affect Tata Steel's pricing in the Netherlands?
So the revenue per ton of steel actually declined by about 43 3Rs quarter on quarter. However, they were able to offset some of that price pressure with lower raw material costs.
So they're benefiting from lower input costs like coking coal and iron ore.
Exactly. But the European market remains challenging. That difference between steel prices and input costs, what we call spreads, is narrowing, and that puts a squeeze on their profit margins.
So maintaining that balance between steel prices and input costs is going to be crucial for their profitability in Europe.
Okay.
Let's turn our attention now to their UK operations.
Yeah, so the UK story is a little different. Their EBITDA loss actually widened to about 147 million this quarter, which is roughly 1,550 crores. And in the previous quarter, that loss was about 91 million goals, around 950 crores.
That's a pretty significant increase in losses. What are the main reasons behind this?
Well, this quarter really reflects the kind of transitional phase they're in. Remember, they decommissioned those blast furnaces at Port Talbot, and that process involves a lot of costs related to shutting down operations and managing inventory.
So these are essentially one-time costs associated with the transition to greener steelmaking.
Exactly. As they streamline their UK operations and that new green steelmaking facility comes online, those transitional costs should start to fade.
So while they're facing some short-term challenges, their long-term focus in the UK remains on sustainability and preserving those jobs. All right, let's talk about the money behind all of this. What can you tell us about Tata Steel's capital expenditure and how they're managing their debt?
Okay, so their capital expenditure, or CapEx, for this quarter was about 400 to 800 crores, roughly 580 million US dollars.
And where did the majority of that investment go?
Well, a large chunk of it went towards their Kalinganagar expansion project, including that brand new blast furnace we were talking about.
Right, that aligns with their focus on growth in India. Now let's talk about their debt. How are they managing their debt levels with all these investments going on?
Yeah, so their net debt currently stands at about 88,817 crores. That's over 10 billion US dollars. It's a big number, but they're actively managing it.
Managing a debt of that size can't be easy. What steps are they taking?
Well, they're really focused on improving their cash flows through operational efficiency and some strategic divestments. They're also looking at different ways to refinance their debt on more favorable terms.
So it's a multi-pronged approach to keep their debt under control. Okay, so before we wrap up this deep dive, let's step back and look at the bigger picture, Tata Steel's commitment to sustainability and what the future holds for them.
Yeah, sustainability is absolutely crucial, especially in the steel industry, which is often seen as, a major contributor to carbon emissions.
So what's Tata Steel doing to kind of address this challenge?
Well, they've made a very clear commitment to sustainable steelmaking, and they're putting their money where their mouth is, investing in greener technologies and processes.
That's great to hear. Can you give us some specific examples of their sustainability initiatives?
Of course. So in the UK, their transition to electric arc furnace technology, a key part of their green steelmaking project, is expected to significantly reduce their CO2 emissions. They're aiming to cut emissions by something like 50 million tons over the next decade.
That's a huge reduction. Are they doing similar things in other regions?
Yes, definitely. In the Netherlands, they're actually in talks with the government to explore some similar decarbonization initiatives.
So it's a collaborative approach working with governments to kind of accelerate that transition to a low-carbon future. What about sustainability in India?
So in India, they're really focused on responsible growth. That new blast furnace in Kalinganagar is a prime example of that.
Can you remind us what makes that blast furnace so special?
Sure, so it uses this really innovative evaporative cooling system. Think of it like a giant swamp cooler for the furnace. It's actually the first of its kind in all of India, and it drastically reduces their water and power consumption. So not only does this benefit the environment, but it also helps their bottom line.
It sounds like they're making a real effort to incorporate sustainability into their entire operation. But I imagine that navigating the legal and regulatory landscape around sustainability, especially in a country like India, can be pretty complex.
Oh, you're absolutely right. There's a particular piece of legislation in India, the Authorized Act of 2004, that's creating some uncertainty for companies like Tata Steel.
Okay, let's break this down a little bit. What's the Authorized Act all about, and how is it affecting Tata Steel?
So the Authorized Act basically aims to ensure that a portion of the revenue generated from mining activities in the state of Odisha is allocated for the development of local communities that are affected by that mining.
That sounds like a reasonable goal.
Yeah.
So what's the issue?
The challenge really lies in the interpretation and implementation of the act. There's a lot of ambiguity surrounding how the levy should be calculated and collected, and that's led to some legal disputes and challenges.
So it's a case of regulatory uncertainty, making it difficult for companies to plan and operate smoothly. How is Tata Steel dealing with all of this?
Well, they're being really proactive about it. They're actively engaging with the authorities to seek clarity and try to find resolution.
Yeah.
They've actually filed a petition with the Supreme Court of India, and they're also in discussions with state authorities to try and figure out a path forward.
So they're taking the right steps to address this legal challenge. What's the broader takeaway for our listeners from all of this?
I think it highlights the complexities that companies face when operating in these dynamic regulatory environments. It really underscores the importance of proactive stakeholder engagement, transparent communication, and a commitment to finding sustainable solutions that balance those economic interests with social and environmental considerations.
That's a really valuable insight.
Yeah.
It just shows that business decisions aren't made in a vacuum. They're influenced by this whole web of factors.
Absolutely.
Okay, so after this deep dive into Tata Steel, what are some of your key takeaways? What really stands out to you?
I think for me, it's Tata Steel's resilience that really stands out. They're facing all these multiple challenges head on, whether it's, adapting to those market shifts in Europe or making these really strategic investments in India. And their commitment to sustainable steelmaking is really commendable. They're not just talking about it. They're actually putting their money where their mouth is and investing in these cleaner technologies and processes.
Yeah, I mean, their sustainability efforts are definitely impressive, especially those decarbonization initiatives we were talking about in the UK and the Netherlands. They're really setting a positive example for the whole steel industry. It shows that a company can, be both profitable and environmentally responsible.
Exactly. And, their India operations are really a bright spot, driven by that strong domestic demand, those strategic capacity expansions, and a favorable cost structure. That Kalinganagar expansion is a real game changer. It's poised to boost both their production capacity and profitability, all while minimizing their environmental impact.
It's clear that Tata Steel is playing a really key role in India's economic growth, and their investments there not just in expanding capacity, but in innovation and sustainability, show a deep commitment to that market.
Absolutely. And their focus on, enhancing the customer experience through things like their e-commerce platform and those construction service centers is a really smart move. It shows they're not just focused on producing steel, but on becoming a comprehensive solutions provider.
It's a strategic approach for sure, aligning themselves with evolving customer needs and building those stronger relationships. Now, while their overall financial performance is pretty solid, we do need to acknowledge the challenges they're facing in Europe, especially in the UK with that whole transition to green steelmaking.
Right. The UK operations are definitely in a transformative phase. Those transitional costs are impacting their profitability in the short term. But it's a strategic move toward a more sustainable future. And the UK government support really underscores the significance of that transition.
Yeah, it's a long-term play. They're investing in a future where steelmaking isn't just about the quantity of steel produced, but about minimizing that environmental impact and maximizing value for all stakeholders.
Exactly. And it highlights that, sustainable business practices aren't just about altruism. They're about ensuring that long-term viability and competitiveness.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to touch on a really crucial aspect that's often overlooked: corporate governance.
Right. It's the foundation of any sustainable and successful business. It's about transparency, accountability, and ethical conduct at every level.
So how does Tata Steel measure up in this regard?
Well, Tata Steel has a really long-standing reputation for strong corporate governance. They consistently rank among the top companies globally for their ethical practices and transparency. They have a really robust framework of policies and procedures to ensure compliance with all applicable laws and regulations.
That's really good to hear, especially considering they're part of the Tata Group, which has a long legacy of ethical business practices and social responsibility.
Yes, and that ethos is deeply ingrained in Tata Steel's culture. Their commitment to corporate social responsibility is really evident in their various initiatives that focus on community development, education, healthcare, and environmental conservation.
It's inspiring to see a company of their scale using its resources and influence to make such a positive impact on society.
It's a good reminder that businesses can be agents of positive change, contributing to a more sustainable and equitable world.
Well said. Great. So before we conclude, I have a thought-provoking question for our listeners. We talked a lot about Tata Steel's transition to green steelmaking in the UK, a really significant investment. But what are the long-term implications of this shift? Not just for Tata Steel, but for the global steel industry as a whole. How will this impact the economics of steel production, the competitiveness of different regions, and ultimately the price of steel for consumers?
That's a great question. It really makes us think about the ripple effects of this green revolution in steelmaking. It's not just about cleaner production. It's about reshaping the entire industry.
Exactly. And those ripple effects will be felt all the way from the boardrooms to everyday consumers.
The transition to green steelmaking requires substantial investments in new technologies and infrastructure, and this will undoubtedly impact the economics of steel production, potentially leading to some higher upfront costs.
So could we see higher steel prices for consumers in the short term then?
It's definitely a possibility. However, we also have to consider the long-term benefits of green steel. Reduced carbon emissions mean a healthier planet, which ultimately benefits everyone.
Right. The cost of inaction on climate change is going to far outweigh the cost of investing in sustainable solutions.
Exactly. And, green steel can also enhance the competitiveness of regions and companies that embrace these innovations. Consumers are increasingly demanding sustainably produced products these days.
So it's not just about the cost. It's about brand value and market positioning. Companies that are seen as leaders in sustainability are going to have a real competitive edge.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the geopolitical implications either. The transition to green steelmaking could reshape global trade patterns and influence the balance of power in the steel industry.
Wow, so it's a multidimensional shift with really far-reaching consequences. This whole journey toward green steel is going to be fascinating to watch unfold.
It really is. And as with any kind of significant transformation, there are going to be challenges and uncertainties along the way. But I think the future belongs to those who embrace innovation and sustainability.
Well said. The steel industry is definitely at a crossroads, and Tata Steel, with their commitment to green steelmaking, seems to be positioning themselves well for this future.
I agree. Their strategic investments and ongoing transformations really reflect their vision for long-term sustainable growth.
Well, listeners, we've explored Tata Steel's financial performance, their strategic initiatives, the challenges they face, and their vision for a greener future. We hope you found this deep dive informative and insightful.
Hopefully, even a bit inspiring. Tata Steel's journey is a testament to the power of innovation, resilience, and a commitment to creating value for all.
Absolutely. And it's a good reminder that even in this really complex global landscape, businesses can thrive by embracing sustainability and making a positive impact.
And on that note, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Tata Steel. We hope you've gained a deeper understanding of this global giant and the forces shaping its future.
And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a fascinating topic. Until then, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep those questions coming.